Hello everyone. Two videos in one night this time because Ken McMillan asked me a question about genetics. And genetics gets complicated, so this one needs its own little section. So this is genetics and albinism. So he asked what the likelihood was that I would have an albino child, or if albinism skipped generations. So we're going to explain this the long way, which I am not a geneticist. I am a biology nerd and a Spanish major. So this is going to be a simple explanation that's just a cut and dry answer. We're going to use a Punnett square. And the Punnett square is a little table that will show you the statistical likelihood of somebody having a certain genetic trait. In this case, albinism. So capital A equals, oh, sorry, the camera's backwards. Capital A equals not albino, and lowercase a equals albino. Because capital A, the capital letter in any Punnett square usually represents the dominant trait, and the little a usually represents the recessive trait. Now, when I say dominant and recessive, I mean that the dominant trait is the trait that will win over the recessive trait if there is one of each in somebody. So that is why most people are not albino, because if you have one albino gene and one not albino gene, the not albino gene takes over and the person is not albino, thus making it the dominant trait. Like if you had a parent who was blonde and a parent who was brunette. If you got a blonde gene from the blonde parent and a brunette gene from the brunette parent, you'd look like you were brunette, but you could still have blonde children. And this will be explained in the Punnett square. So we're going to start with me, because the question was asked about me, and I am albino. And if I were to marry somebody who was albino, there would be almost an 100% chance that our children would be albino. Because we both have only the genes for albinism, since we both have recessive traits. So I have to have two little a's to be albino, and my partner has to have two little a's to be albino. So there would almost be, genetically, an 100% chance that our children would be albino, because to be albino you have to have two recessive traits, and you can only pass on the traits that you have. However, if I was to marry somebody who is not albino, there are two different outcomes, because somebody can either have both dominant traits or a dominant and a recessive trait and not display albinism. So we're going to start with the first scenario, which is having children with somebody who has both dominant traits. So the Punnett square looks, I'm writing it as I'm talking, so the Punnett square looks like this. If this person is completely not albino and doesn't have any recessive albino traits, then there is almost an 100% chance that the child will not be albino, because they can only pass on the dominant trait. So even though these children will become carriers, meaning they have the gene, but they are not openly displaying it, that means that they will not be albino, but they have a possibility of having children who are albino. And the next scenario is one in which someone has a dominant trait and a recessive trait, but it will not show that they have a recessive trait outwardly. You'd have to check their genes to know. And in a situation like this, it would be a 50% chance your children could either be carriers or they could be albino. I'm sorry, I'm still trying to figure out this camera. I keep moving the picture out of the way. And then for people who aren't albino, there are two different scenarios. Well, several different scenarios, but the first is that they are both dominant and homozygous. Homozygous means homo, meaning the same, and zygous meaning like a genetic trait. Homozygous means that they have the same genetic trait for both of them. And I might be getting a little too technical here, I'm sorry. And heterozygous means that you have two different ones, like hetero meaning different, and then zygous referring to your genes. So the two little a's together and the two big a's together are considered homozygous, and then little a, big A together is considered heterozygous. But anyway, so if two people who don't display any albino traits and aren't carriers of the gene have children, then there is no likelihood that their children will be carriers or anything. But if somebody who is a carrier and somebody who is not a carrier have children, then there will be a small chance their children might be carriers, depending, like there's a 50-50 chance their children will end up being carriers like they were without knowing. And then in my situation, what happened was, like, none of my parents are albino. And, well, neither one of my parents is albino, and I don't have any siblings, so we don't have anything to go by. And nobody in my family that we know of has been albino. My great-grandfather was adopted, and we don't know anything about his family. But otherwise, genetically, nobody in my family has been albino for as long as we've known. And this means that it was... Sorry, I'm still writing as I'm talking, so this made it kind of a surprise. But my mom has heard stories, and she's told me that there are some people who will have albino people in their family, but 8 generations back, so you don't know. So you have a lot of carriers from, like, statistic chance, and then finally somebody who's albino again. So what happened to me was I had 2 heterozygous parents, and I was this 25% chance right here that a child would be albino, and I keep moving. It's the 2 little a's. Sorry. Me and the camera don't get along. So... I know the camera and somebody just face-palmed at that somewhere. Anyway, and then these are all the other chances that could have happened. Children can either be carriers like their parents, not carry the gene at all, or display the recessive gene if they get both of them. So my likelihood for having children who are albino depends on the genes of my partner. Because for me, I have albino genes, and it's definitely going to be an albino baby, so it depends on the partner. So if I marry an albino person, 100% chance. If I marry a non-albino person, if they are homozygous, meaning they display both of their genes for albinism are the dominant trait, then my children will definitely be carriers, but will not be albino. And if I marry someone who's heterozygous for albinism, there's a 50-50 chance that my children will be albino. And that is why albino people can sometimes have not albino babies, and people who aren't albino can have albino babies. It's just how genetics works. And I'm sorry, I really did try to make that as simple as possible, but it's a little bit hard to explain with just a whiteboard. And if you have any questions about it, I can try to answer them in a more efficient manner or try to clarify anything for you. But if you look up Punnett squares, or you look up something about genetics pertaining to this, then it might explain it a little bit better. There are traits like this that are sex-linked and not sex-linked. That means that these traits are on the sex chromosomes. This is not a sex-linked trait. It is just a gene that a gene that comes up otherwise normally. Like sex-linked traits are like color blindness, and that's why you see it more in men, because men only have one X chromosome instead of 2, and it lays in the X chromosome. But I'm going to stop there so that I don't fry anybody's brain, because I know some of us are not biologically minded, and I know that it can be crazy to try to explain genetics. So if you didn't understand, it's okay, ask questions, and I will try to clarify, because I'm probably totally scattered right now, and I hope that you got some of what I was saying. Bye!